A ella le dijeron que iban a ser 10 personas, pero ustedes se convocaron tanto que vinimos al Price, y además, ¿cómo se llama? Estamos esperando que llegue más gente, así que podríamos tener que implementar otras salas, en la cual ¿cómo se llama? A transmitir por el streaming. Ya, pero quiero simplemente que le demos un aplauso a Carla y a Ada por todo este trabajo que han hecho esta semana. ¿Quieres decir unas palabras? Y las dejo con Carla, que es la coordinadora de Equidad e Inclusión del Observatorio de Gestión de Personas.
Bueno, bienvenidas todas. Para nosotros esta jornada ha sido súper importante. Nosotras con Loredana hemos partido haciendo bastante trabajo en equidad de género desde el aula. Ha sido difícil, desafiante y cada vez hemos ido avanzando más. Ustedes también con su organización, la Secretaría de Género y Sexualidad, también con el Centro de Estudiantes han ido también abriendo otros espacios. Creo que es súper importante este espacio de reflexión, de aprendizaje mutuo. Hoy y en varias entrevistas que me hicieron esta semana me preguntaban, bueno, ¿son feministas de derecha, de izquierda? ¿El feminismo permite esto, no lo permite? Y buscando siempre las fisuras entre nosotras, ¿no? Y creo que voy a hablar personalmente, como siempre hablo desde el movimiento más feminista. Uno lo que quiere es equidad de derechos, la detención de todo tipo de violencia. Para mí hoy día es súper significativo el tema de parar con la violencia. Ayer vimos la noticia de un pseudo femicidio, un femicidio, y hallaron el cuerpo de una mujer de 84 años. Cuando me preguntaban qué tipo de violencia queremos detener, bueno, la económica, la autonomía del cuerpo, la económica, la emocional, todo. O sea, equidad de derecho en todo. Y si eso nos convoca, creo que más que dividirnos tenemos que juntarnos, y también la psicoeducación y educarnos. Nosotras también nos tenemos que desconstruir en muchos aspectos. Y más que ver las barreras, soy positiva, veo los avances desde que pasábamos un pequeño módulo de esto a que tengamos ramos de pregrado, ramos de posgrado y ahora un postítulo en género. Y quiero agradecer el apoyo de Fabián, Vicencio en toda la organización de esto, de Pedro por abrir los espacios, que sin duda que hay que sumar hombres, porque si ellos tienen el poder, la única forma también de compartirlo es que abriendo estos espacios. O lo tomamos, pero por una parte también hay que abrir las conversaciones. Así que muchas gracias y dejo con ustedes a la experta, que es Ada Sinacore. Tiene más de 20 años de experiencia en justicia social, equidad de género, educación no sexista, y además es presidenta del Instituto de Género de la Universidad de McGill. Por lo tanto, experiencia tiene de sobra, también como activista, así que le den un caluroso aplauso y una bienvenida.
Thank you. Is this working? Hello? Oh. Yes, it's working. I can't stand behind a thing. So when I was asked to do this talk, I was told there was going to be 10 people sitting around a table. So that's okay. That's not what it is. I'm very happy to see so many people here, because this is a very important day and this is a very important march, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So I've been here since Monday, meeting with faculty, students, people in the business field, talking about gender equity and social justice and feminism and women's rights and LGBTQ plus people's rights. So it's been a very interesting week. I just want to give you a little bit of information about me and the work I've been doing, and then I'd like to hear from you, right? I'd like this to be a conversation, because it was going to be a conversation with 10 people, so let's have a conversation with the whole room. And don't be afraid to speak, I hope. So I've been working as a feminist since, probably the 1970s. Graduated, I went to university in the late 70s, early 80s, and life was very different back then, right, in North America and for women. And so I've been doing this work for a long time. I worked with the New York City Police Department for many years as a first responder to women who were sexually assaulted. I've sat on almost every committee and every board related to gender equity initiatives and gender rights. I've sat on the Canadian Council for Refugees fighting to make sure that women and LGBTQ plus folk who were in situations where they could be violated could come to Canada and get a safe haven. I have worked with the Canadian women's movement to try to bring about equity and equal rights on campuses. I was the first woman in my program, so that was very interesting. Yes. So I've been doing this work a really long time. I've worked in many countries doing this work, and I think it's really important. And so I think you should all give yourselves a round of applause, because the only way this work gets done is because we have to be brave, right? It really, really means that we have to say, you know what? I'm going to be brave. I'm going to speak out. I'm going to believe that women and other diverse minority groups have the right to have access to education, to have access to economic freedom, to have access to good quality health care, to be able to be in charge and in control of their own bodies without somebody else telling them what to do with their bodies, right? And to be able to walk through the world with a sense of confidence and a sense of safety. And that's the work that you're doing. And I think you should all give yourselves a round of applause for doing that work. So that said, I'd like this to be a conversation. So I want to just open it up. And you can ask me anything you want. And I will do my best to answer it. All right? So questions or the conversation, thoughts.
Las preguntas tienen que ser al micrófono para que las puedan traducir. Si las dicen arriba, no va a tener la traducción. Tú la dices en español, se lo traducen en inglés. También puede ser en inglés, claro.
O sea, no.
Choose your language.
Yeah.
French is okay too.
Yes. I have a question about something that a student asked today, and we didn't know how to answer.
Okay.
It was a task from a teacher that gave it to the first year students in communication. They had to define what's masculine and what's feminine and where's the limit. And actually, we've been trying to to not have that, to say why is, I don't know, blue masculine and pink feminine.
Okay.
And so, I don't know, we were really surprised by that question and we didn't know what to answer. Or,
Yeah. I'm not sure I would know how to answer that question either, right? So let me talk a little bit about how I conceptualize gender, right? And hopefully that conceptualization will get at this confusion, because I think that question is problematic. Okay, and I'll talk why in a minute. So when we talk about gender, right? So as Carla mentioned, I was the chair of the Gender, Sexuality, Feminist, and Social Justice Studies program at McGill University, a program which I created. And so it's a very important program. And so the conversations we had in that program, we debated whether or not the title of the program should be woman or gender. And we decided to go with the word gender because it's a much more inclusive topic, right? So the way we define gender is we distinguish biological sex. We talk about assigned sex, male, female, and intersex. And we talk about gender, which is about gender includes identity, gender expression, gender performance, right? And so this idea that gender is hegemonically situated in a biological sex is a really problematic idea, right? That men are masculine and women are feminine, and that they're that all the time, right? And they're that all the time. And the problem with the conceptualization of masculinity and femininity as a binary is what happens is that because gender is used as a way to organize power relationships between men and women, it's often used as a way to devalue femininity, and if femininity is seen as negative because that's the way gender has historically been constructed, and femininity is linked to being female, using gender in this way serves to keep women oppressed. Right? So we don't want to use gender in a way that serves to keep women oppressed. And if we use gender in this way where femininity is linked to female and masculinity is linked to male, it also serves to support the oppression of LGBTQ plus people as well, right? So we want to deconstruct that. So what we're trying to get people to understand is that masculinity and femininity exists in all people, right? There is no line or gray area. It's fluid. We move in and out of these traits. And we would hope that we would equally value, right? So typically, masculinity is valued over femininity. And it's linked to other things that have nothing to do with masculinity, like intellectual ability, reasoning, etc. And then femininity gets linked to things like emotionality, stuff like that. So we want to deconstruct that. We want to get away from those binaries. So the answer to the question is, it's a bad question, right? It's not the right question we should be asking. Well, if we're going to ask a question about masculinity, the question is, how do people move in and out of masculinity in different ways? And what is the cost and benefits of moving in and out of masculinity in different ways to different people depending on their biological sex or their sexual orientation? Does that make sense?
I have a deeper question. Because then my question is, what is masculinity? What is femininity? Because then, I don't know, being strong is just being strong. It's not feminine or masculine. Yep. Like, what does it even mean? Because I don't know. Some people say, "Oh, women are better. They write like more beautifully." I don't know how to say that. Why? That's just a way. Like, that's not feminine. And what is it even? Like, what's being I don't know.
So you are asking the question that in gender studies we grapple with all the time, right? So do we need even to label these things as masculine and feminine, right? Like, why are we even having that debate? Why are we having that discussion? Why are we stuck with this categorical data, if you will, right? My students, I always talk to my students, and they're like, if there's a binary, I'm not going to like it, right? And I even went in my classes, and my students will ask a binary question, and they're like, oh no, there's a binary. What are we going to do with that? So historically, we've kind of had these conversations about masculinity and femininity. To deconstruct how society uses gender as a form of social control, right? So it's going to be very controversial, but I'm going to say, how much more trouble can I get in this week? So gender in terms of femininity has historically been used as a form of social control for women, right? We raise women in two ways. And I'm talking from a North American perspective, but maybe some of this will be reflected in your own experience, right? We raise women with this unconscious fear of rape, right? We raise women that this is a possibility. Now, the reality is, it's a reality in Canada. 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted. So the reality of sexual assault is quite high, right? But what we do is we raise women with this fear, right? And that fear gets connected to how we raise women in terms of what we expect of girls and women in terms of gender presentation. So from a very young age, society and the social cultural norms of society are teaching girls how to behave appropriately, right? Does this make sense? So when they've done studies, right? I mean, where how much space in a house do we give a little boy or a little girl, right? So boys get a lot more space, a lot more area to roam. They did a study a long time ago, but it's still an important study, where they took an infant and they gave it to people and said, that it's a boy? And they attributed all kinds of traits that will link to what we would expect of boys to that baby. They took the same baby, losing my armband. They took the same baby, called it a girl. A whole bunch of different traits were associated with it. So when we started, when I was in university, there was no such thing as women's studies, right? You know, women's studies didn't exist. I had a very brave professor, Dr. Rhoda Unger, and she had this course on women, and I was going to take it. And that was the course, and it changed my life, that course, because finally somebody was talking about all the things that I had felt and experienced in my life, right? So this idea that there's women's studies and now gender studies is a new idea, which is why we needed these, early in this research and early in this work, we needed these conceptualizations of masculinity and femininity so we could get people to see what we're talking about, right? Because if we don't have language, it's hard to get people to see what we're talking about. And if we don't have categorical data, it's hard for people to take us seriously. I don't believe we need that language necessarily anymore, but I think at the time in the history of the discipline, it was very, very important for us to be able to show how girls were being differentially treated, marginalized, and socialized as a way to police their gender. So I'm going to quote this study, where's Carla? She's so tired of this study I'm going to quote. But we teach girls and women so if I go back to this unconscious, the way we raise girls about rape, right? We also raise girls to police their gender, right? Because if I'm going to stay safe, I have to behave in a certain way in certain situations, right? So we all know this. So one of my students did a study on the sexual harassment of girls, right? And I've talked about this study many times because it's a good example of this problem with this gender binaries, right? And in her study, she looked at adolescent girls who were sexually harassed or bullied in school, okay? And what she found was, and this study was done 3 years ago. This is not an old study. This was just recently done, and we're in the process of publishing it, was that if girls were too feminine, right? I'm putting quotes around that just so because we're on the same page here. What's your name? Carolina. And so if they were too feminine, they were accused of being sluts, whores, etc. So they were bullied for being too feminine. If they were perceived to be too masculine, right? Then they were bullied because they were too masculine. They were called lesbians, etc., etc., etc. Now, if we didn't have homophobia, being called a lesbian might not be such a hard thing, but they were bullied. So what we called the study was walking the tightrope. You know what a tightrope is, right? Where you got to walk like this. That women and girls spend a whole bunch of time trying to stay on this very straight line, right? So that they don't get bullied, right? So these conceptualizations around femininity and masculinity help us understand these experiences of abuse that women experience. And it also helps us understand that if women are so busy policing their gender to stay safe, right? Then what think about the amount of energy about that. Think about what that's taking away from. Right? Look, I can walk this tightrope, but like I have to walk the tightrope and continue to talk to you and come across as interesting. That's not an easy thing to do. So imagine being in school and trying to learn, and while you're trying to learn, you're walking that tightrope. You've all had this experience. I don't think everybody's had that experience, right? You're all shaking your head. So this idea of policing gender. So these concepts of masculinity and femininity have historically, in the discipline, given us language to argue and make discussion and discuss about this using gender as a form of social control, which results in women having to police their gender. And if they don't police it well enough, they're going to get bullied, assaulted, or harassed. And so that's the challenge that we have when we're trying to have these conversations. Okay? Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Hello. So you think femininity and masculinity should be completely erased?
No.
And why is that?
I mean, I think we have to be, this is an interesting discussion, right? And I think we need to understand these constructs because those constructs are still very much alive and well in how society is constructed. So without understanding them, talking about them, and thinking about the limitations of them, right, we have a problem. There is nothing inherently wrong with masculinity. And there is nothing inherently wrong with femininity, right? What the problem is where power gets associated with masculinity and femininity. And so if we don't understand these things, because they are alive and well in society in terms of how people understand their world, right? You know, then if we erase them, we're getting rid of those conversations. The other thing I get really worried about is that is the erasure of women in feminist history, right? And so it's very easy to say, okay, here's where we are. We're talking about gender. We're trying to problematize this idea of masculinity and femininity. We're trying to make this much more complex and have more complex conversations because this binary isn't working. And that's important. But we have to remember how we got here. And if we erasure results in the erasure of that history, and if we lose that history, we may lose our ability to move forward. And so I think it's really important that we honor the past, acknowledge the present, and move forward in the future. And I think that matters a great deal, a great deal.
Hi.
Hi. Hola.
I would like to put. ¿Puedo hablar sin esto?
Are we doing Spanish or English? Because either it's in my ear or it's not in my ear.
English.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to talk about something that maybe I don't know, because they are too young and I am not so young, so I would put a subject different, kind of different. But I think there is a hard time because when you are like 30s or more, or all your life like infertility, you are punished if you don't have kids.
Okay.
Otherwise, if you have kids, you are punished too because you have like to work and have kids, be a good mother, be a good worker, and you also have to be feminine and look beautiful and like cope with a load of demands.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, what have you thought of this?
Mm-hmm.
How you manage this like kind of discussion about women and maternity?
Mm-hmm. So do I need that? I don't know. So it's a really interesting it's a very interesting question, and it's a very complex idea that that women want to work, they want their careers, they want to be treated with respect, they want economic viability and economic security, and they also want to have children. They want to raise those children well, right? And so we have to really be thinking, first of all, we've kind of constructed, society has been constructed in a way, and it's really problematic, but it's been constructed in a way that we've gendered careers. So women end up going into these careers that are good for women, right? Versus women can go into any career. And so we socializing women to go into these careers that are good for women. However, are these careers good for women? They tend to be lower paying, right? They tend to be put careers in positions where they are at the bottom of the hierarchy. They tend to be in positions where they don't have power and voice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to reconsider how we've constructed the whole world of work in terms of this idea. We also need to think about the fact that women need access to childcare, affordable childcare. And one of the things that one of the social movements I was involved with, we have the women's movement in Quebec, and the women's movement in Quebec was very, very active. And we actually fought, this is about maybe 20 years ago, very hard to get affordable childcare. And what we see across the country in Canada is those provinces that have affordable childcare women have more financial stability, more access to career and economic opportunity, etc. And the thing that's very interesting in terms of the data, for those of you who are going to say, oh, but somebody else is raising your children. Okay, now I'm going to tell you two different stories and then whatever. What the data shows us, because we need data to convince people sometimes, right? What the data shows us is a stay-at-home mom spends the same amount of time interacting one-on-one with their child as a woman who's working full-time. Now, how is that possible? How is that possible, right? Well, what we see is that when a woman is working at home, she's working at home, right? Being at home doesn't mean you're not working. It just means you're not getting paid for the labor you're doing, right? It's labor that gets not valued, right? It's still labor. And it's an important labor in society. In Quebec, when we got affordable childcare and women could stay in the workforce, it created a great deal of problems for schools, right? Great deal of problems for schools because all of these stay-at-home moms who are working, but their work isn't being valued by a salary, were volunteering everywhere. And all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, I can actually spend as much time working as I am volunteering, but actually have a stronger economic support for me. So affordable childcare shifted that for them, right? Shifted that for them. Because they said, I don't have to do all this free labor. I can actually do labor and get paid for that labor. So it's really important. Not to say, and I feel very strongly about this, if women choose to stay home, I'm 100% in support of that, if that's their choice, right? And it's interesting, and it gets imposed. I remember, I'm trained as a psychologist, used to do a lot of couples therapy, and the couple would come in, and they'd be having a baby. Maybe I shouldn't say kid, that's probably not a good slang. And they'd say, oh, it's not worth for her to work. It's not worth for my wife to work because inherently women are being paid less than men, right? So there's the inequity right there. Well, it's not worth it for my wife to work because look, if we deduct childcare from her salary, it's like she's making no money at all. I'm like, okay, that's an interesting idea. why don't we deduct childcare from your salary? Now you're both making the same amount of money, so I guess she should be working. Right? So when we have to reconceptualize these things. And then what I say to couples, what I used to say to couples, because I'm working in different zones now, is do you realize the economic loss to your family if your spouse, who wants to work, stops working? Because you're going to lose income, yes. You're going to lose promotion. You're going to lose benefits. You're going to lose retirement money. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. So all of a sudden, this equation that they've misused changes. Like, oh, wow, I never really thought about the long-term implications in terms of my financial security if the woman stops working. So in Canada, what the women's movement did there was we fought very, very, very hard for 6 months paid maternity leave for both parents, same-sex couples or heterosexual couples. So that means that there technically could be somebody home for a full year, still getting paid, right? Still getting paid. And at McGill, if a woman chooses to leave McGill to stay home to take care of her child for maternity leave, she gets 3 years maternity leave with her job guaranteed back. So 6 months paid, full salary. After 6 months, people have to make a decision about that. And then 3 years paid to stay home for each child. 3 years for each child. Only, right, if they keep having children while they're staying home. That made a huge difference in terms of many people's situations. Now, professors can never do that because we are in a very different position, but certainly the support staff, full-time staff, contract staff, this is a huge benefit that they take advantage of, and it's very important. So the issue around parenting and motherhood and all that is, first of all, the idea that only the mother's taking care of the child. I mean, I hate it when people say, oh, my husband's babysitting. I'm like, excuse me, is that his baby? Because you would never say, a mother is babysitting. Nobody would ever use that language. It's problematic. So the systems and structures that are in place need to shift so women have equal access to childcare and employment and those kinds of things. Does that answer your question? Yeah? But it's complex. It's really complex, you know? And we see it in provinces where they don't have affordable childcare. Big differences in what happens in terms of women's career development, the decisions they make, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Especially for single mothers. Like a single mother who does not have access to affordable childcare is in a very difficult situation until the person starts maternelle or kindergarten, which is a full day in Canada.
I don't understand the concept
Like,
the tricky thing, I think, I don't know if it's the tricky thing is that, like, conceptually, there is a punishment if you
Right.
have kids.
right.
If you don't have kids,
Yep.
there is a punishment, like
Right.
a social punishment.
So the society constructs it, I mean, again, this is coming from my Canadian American kind of thing, but society constructs it that if a woman doesn't have children, she's selfish, right? God forbid she doesn't want to have children for whatever reason, then she must be selfish. If she has children and goes to work, she's narcissistic. And if she has children and stays home, well then why isn't she taking care of herself and doing what she needs to do? And then so no matter what choice you make, right, it gets constructed in ways that it's easy to devalue that choice. And so we really need to work very hard to ensure that all choices are valued, right, because of how society constructs these ideas, and that there's opportunities and accessibility for women to make a free choice based on the best needs of themselves and their families. Right? So we need to address both. We need to address these attitudes, and we need to address this structural inequality that exists around these issues. Yeah, it's tough. I think I lost my scarf. All right. So now we're going to get aggressive, you know. And
I wanted to ask, what do you think about, what is your point of view of the separatism? Because it's been like a very controversial thing nowadays.
so when you say separatism,
Like, for example, men aren't here, so like they like to.
There are a couple. So the idea that let's see.
I mean, we have some things that we do like only women, and other the men can come. But what do you think? Like this separatism? I don't know.
It's an interesting question. I think we have to be careful, right? So first of all, I think there's times and spaces where it's appropriate and helpful to have women's only spaces, right? I think that there's times where we need to be thoughtful about what those times are and where they are, etc., right? And I think we need to be clear that we need safer spaces for women everywhere. However, again, I think what we need to is partner with men. We need to build alliances with men. We need to work with men who will work with other men, right? So if we really want to bring about change, we want to have men walk with us in this change so that they are part of this change. If we always set this up as us versus them, we're just going to have a lot of conflict and a lot of defensiveness. So the question is, how do we work with men, and how do men work with us? Right? How do men work with us? So we can walk together to bring about social change. Because men have to understand, and I have this conversation a lot, that they will benefit from the feminist movement. They're not losing power necessarily. They see it, oh my goodness, I'm going to lose all this power, et cetera, et cetera. Absolutely not. No. This is about us walking together. It's about elevating so everybody has access. It's about equity, right? It's about inclusion, right? And so we need to figure out ways to have these difficult dialogues such that we can walk together, we can learn from each other, such that men can influence other men to do it differently. And if we take a purely separatist position, that can't happen. That can't happen. So we need to be very thoughtful about in what spaces do we need to be walking together, and in what spaces do we need to be having a women's only conversation. And that's challenging. And that's something we need to think very thoughtful about. And I get concerned that these become things that we fight about. And so it's interesting that that this is a conversation that's been going on since the late 70s and since my involvement in women's rights and human rights, basically. And that is, we start fighting amongst each other, right? We start fighting amongst each other. So the way I conceptualize this is, you know, there's a pie out there, right? And we're given this piece of the pie, just this little wedge of the pie. And so then what we start doing is we start fighting in our little wedge of the pie, and we're so busy fighting over what we think about this piece of the pie that we forget that we want to get access to the rest of the pie. And what the feminist movement, in my opinion, from my experience over the last 30 some odd years, and from what I hear, is that we need to learn how to stop fighting with each other. We need to start listening to each other. We need to figure out ways that this is complex, ways to work together across our differences, because our ultimate goal is to get access to that bigger piece of the pie. So we need to figure out what spaces need to be ours and what spaces do we need to share or work with people, or they need to work with us. Does that answer your question? So it's not, again, always, if you ask me, should it be this or this, what am I going to say? Shouldn't be either. Right? As soon as there's a binary, and I'm going to ask you to do the same, as soon as you see a binary, right, wrong, us, them, male, female, etc., think, oh, wait a second, that's a binary. I have to deconstruct that. I have to think about that differently. That's too simple. It's got to be more complex than that binary. It's got to be harder. It's got to be muddier. It's got to be messier. Right? We want messy. Messy is good. Right? Okay? Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Hi, so I'm not from here, but I wanted to know, over the past couple of years, what's become really important to me is kind of like intersectional feminism.
Okay.
And I was just wondering...
Australia?
Yeah, Australia,
okay.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, what are some tangible ways that as a white cisgender woman, I can use my privilege to help out people of different other intersections?
Okay, that's a really good question. I talked about intersectionality the other day. I think intersectionality is really, really important. So let me just define intersectionality for everybody, right? So what intersectionality means, we all have multiple intersecting identities, right? You're not just women, right? So you have a gender, you have a sex, you have a race, you have an age, maybe you have a religion, maybe you have an ethnicity, you have a nationality, etc. And those identities come in and out of salience in different moments, right? So right now, maybe my identity in the room is more professor. Maybe on the march it'll be more activist. But it doesn't mean any of those other identities go away, right? So we all have identities, which I do an exercise with my students, and I tell them, okay, write down an identity you never think about. And we all have an identity we rarely have to think about. It doesn't have to cross our mind. And that's typically an identity where we are situated in a position of privilege. And then I say, what's an identity you have to think about all the time? And everybody writes down something, I put it and we read them out aloud. They give it to me secretly. And there's always everybody has an identity that they feel vulnerable about, right? And that identity you feel vulnerable about, if we can understand that everybody, regardless of sex or gender or sexual orientation or age or race, etc., has an identity they feel vulnerable about. And those positions of vulnerability shift and change and move across spaces, across contexts, across countries, and across time, right? So what is important to understand is how your privilege intersects with somebody else's vulnerability, right? How your privilege intersects with somebody else's vulnerability. And in that way, and understand how your vulnerability intersects with their privilege, right? Because the problem isn't privilege, and the problem isn't power. The problem is how we use it, right? The problem is how we use it. I am very lucky, right? I'm a tenured professor. I'm at McGill University, right? That gives me an enormous amount of privilege. But I choose to use my privilege to have these kinds of conversations, right? So it's how you choose to use that privilege, how you choose to walk with other people, to join them in their struggle. Not help them. That's pejorative. To join them in their struggle. To understand we all have these locations of vulnerability. And some people have more locations of vulnerability than others, right? And some people have more locations of privilege than others. But we can use our privilege and use our vulnerability to develop empathy and understanding, collaboration, relationships, and bring about social change. It's the micro level, right? All week I've been saying the same thing, said it over and over and over again. And I'm going to keep saying it until I turn purple. If you can make change at the micro level, you are making change at the macro level. So how do you, as a cisgendered woman, use intersectionality to make change? In every moment of every day with everyone you speak to. This march today didn't happen over a big thing. It happened because there were a lot of little conversations that turned into a big conversation. That's my guess. So if you can have a lot of little conversations, they're going to turn into bigger conversations, and that's going to bring about the kind of change you're talking about. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? I do some work at, I'm associated with Western Sydney University. Yeah, so I was just there for the month of July. That's the accent. Yeah. That's how I got it. Did you hear the New York in me? Yeah. All right. Any other questions or? I'm just going to run over here and get some water.
Hi. I feel like I have a lot of questions that I could ask you, but I want to ask you about something that's been on my mind around this march and protest today, that is the inclusion of different oppressed identities of men in a march and a day that is for women. That I feel that is a problem right now in the feminist movement here, that we lose the focus on women and we try to tackle everybody's problems. What is your take on that, and what can we do about it as feminists?
So can you give me a little bit more background as to what do you mean by the inclusion of identities of men? Like I don't have this history, so I need to answer the question, I have to have some context.
So including as part of the strike issues that don't particularly affect women, or that, I'm sorry, that's not the right way to put it, is including all the possible social movements in this march, in this strike, and losing a little bit of the focus of feminism and women.
So it's an interesting question, and that the answer to that question can go two ways, right? So one answer to that, and you may or may not like my answer, but it's okay. You don't have to agree with anything I say. One answer to that question is that the debate around these issues, and I'll put the debate in the room. The debate around these issues is all oppression is interconnected, right? Is intersectional. So if all oppression is connected and intersectional, allowing all those voices to speak out together against a single oppression, in this case, it's sexual violence against women, lends a bigger voice to it. So the question becomes, then the other side of the debate is, well, if we allow all these different groups to participate, we are then taking attention away from the rights and needs of women. That's the debate. And I don't know that I have a really good answer to that debate, because it really depends on how the march gets constructed, right? If the march gets constructed in a way that, yes, you said gay men's rights, right? Okay, so if there's a gay men's group marching, right, for gay rights, if they construct that march that their rights are linked to yours, and that they're marching to support women's rights because they understand that experience, because they share that experience. They share much of those experiences, right? Because of violence against gay men and homophobia and discrimination and lack of access to certain privileges. That's a very interesting idea, which is the way oftentimes marches get constructed. If it gets constructed that it's disruptive, that it's like, oh, everybody's suffering just as much, so therefore we don't have to attend to women's issues, then that becomes a problematic idea. And so we need to have these intersectional discussions to figure out, well, what are we highlighting today? Right? Today, from my understanding, we're highlighting violence against women, right? So if that's what we're highlighting today, we need to be talking about that, and if other groups want to walk with us, we should welcome them to walk with us, knowing that they're walking with us because we're highlighting violence against women, and if we alleviate violence against women, there's a good shot we'll alleviate violence against them, right? Because it's all connected in a fundamental way. Probably not the answer you were looking for. Right. Any other questions?
Hi again. This can be a little bit controversial, but
Controversy is good. If you saw my slides, I love controversy.
But what's your point of view of feminism and religion?
That's
Especially religions that allow women to do things and to not do some things.
Does this work? Or can you just give me that? Again, there's a binary you've tried to create here between religion and feminism, right? And I don't think it's that simple. I think within many religions, people can be particularly feminist, right? And so I don't think it's for me to tell any woman how to practice their religion and how their feminism, if they identify as feminist, what that looks like in their religion. For example, I have a student in my lab. She identifies very strongly as a feminist and she wears a hijab, right? Because she will explain to you why, for her, wearing the hijab is a feminist act. So I don't think it's for me to decide what religion means to a feminist. I think it's up to the feminist who is somebody who identifies as feminist, who participates in a religion. In what way do they participate? As I said, I have a daughter who's studying to be a rabbi. Maybe I shouldn't have told you that, but she considers herself very highly feminist. And one of the reasons she wants to be a rabbi is because she wants to make sure there's strong feminist women leadership in the rabbinate. So I think people are making these choices, and I think we get set up oftentimes, and I talked about this early in the week about these moral debates, right? From the outside, we often look at religions we're not a part of, and we decide, oh, that's what it looks like, that's what it means. And in Canada, this is a big hot topic right now because the government wants to decide what it means for people to wear religious symbols, and they don't want people to wear religious symbols. But religions mean very different things to very different people. They're a source of support and comfort for many people. They provide places of spirituality for many people. So within different religions, there are different levels of patriarchy and feminism, and I think we need to understand what feminism within a particular religion is from the feminist in that particular religion, because I don't think these two ideas are incompatible necessarily. I mean, there may be the history of, like in Quebec, we have the history of the Catholic Church oppressing women horribly, right? Forcing women to have children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was a silent revolution, and women just stood up and said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I'm not interested in this anymore. We're not going to do this anymore. Many of the women who stood up to fight against that would argue, well, I'm a feminist, but I still have those spiritual beliefs. I don't have to believe what the church told me, but I still have those spiritual beliefs, and I'm still connected to my Catholicism. And so I think it's very muddy and very messy, and I think it's a very complex conversation. See, I'm never going to give you a yes or no answer. Like, that's just not going to happen. Yeah.
You talked about history, like we shouldn't erase, like, so in the past, women were taught that the only thing they could care about, like they didn't have a career, so they should care for their love life. Like if they married the right guy and they were in love, that was success. And how do you bring that to the present and maybe to the future, like with acknowledging?
So when we think about that history, what we want to understand is, where is that history still oppressing women today? Right? So that idea, what? So that idea, that the reason we want to remember history, all history, as much as we can, we want to honor the women who've come before us, who were brave, who did all this work, so that we get to do this work today, right? Like, it's like Rhoda Unger, Dr. Rhoda Unger. I honor her every day, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't get to do this work today. But we also want to understand how history has oppressed certain groups. And so we want to understand and how that history continues to manifest itself today, because that history isn't erased completely, right? So we want to learn to say, well, okay, where today are women still being told that their only value is as a sexual being? Now, all you have to do is watch anything in the media. All you got to do is look at ads, see what the movies are, look at what the big music stars are doing. And right there, women are told every day that what they're valued for is their sexuality, right? Because of the sexualization society. So it looks different, but we're giving women the same message. And so that's why we need to know that, wait a second, this isn't a new message to women, that their value is the sum total of their sexual attractiveness. This is a very old message. It's just looking different now. And that's why that history is important to know, right? Because people sometimes say, well, this is a new idea. I hear this all the time. Well, it's the internet. The internet is a new idea. I'm like, okay, the internet is new, but what the internet is portraying about women is more accessible, but those portrayals are not new portrayals, right? They're not new portrayals. They may be different, they may be more explicit, right? But they are not new. Those ideas of women being sexual objects for the male gaze, for male pleasure, is not a new idea. It's just more accessible in the internet, right? And so we have a huge challenge now about how do we deconstruct these images that are so accessible so that people don't think that those are images are what matters to them. I mean, people are very busy curating their lives. They're very busy, they take a picture and they touch everything up because everybody has to look perfect. How do we tell women they don't have to live up to these idealized images that they see in the internet and the media, that they don't have to just be sexual beings, that they're more than their sexual attraction, which is the same message that was given in that history. Now we have that message in the internet. It looks different, but it's the same message. And we forget that that's the same message. And so when that message gets into the fabric, like it's in the society, it's in the fabric, it's like your veins, you can't live without them, right? We need to get that message out of the fabric. We need to change the message and change the dialogue, right, around sexuality, sexual attraction, and self-worth. And we see this happening over and over again. In schools, grade 7, girls are still start valuing themselves by their looks versus their academic abilities. So it's hard. I don't know if I answered your question, but this is one of my pet peeves. I go on about this one for a long time, folks. Yeah.
Ya, ¿está funcionando lo de que se traduce la pregunta? Sí, es que prefiero así porque así la entienden todas también, que siento que a veces cuando hablamos mal inglés no se entiende. Ya, sí, ¿se traduce solo? Ya. ¿Funciona? Does it work? Does it work? Ya. Primero, quería aprovechar el micrófono para decirle a todas las que están acá que después se sumen a la marcha. Ojalá esto nos sirva también para después ir a protestar juntas. Ya. Y segundo, quería hacer unas preguntas que tienen que ver con que antes hablamos como de diferencia ideológica entre las feministas, como que está la interseccionalidad, el separatismo. ¿Funciona? ¿Sí? ¿Sí o no? Ya, pero que siento que eso solo nos sirve en cuanto se traduzca en diferentes estrategias y que nos sirvan como para seguir avanzando. Y mi pregunta tiene que ver con que también tocamos puntos como de que en realidad a todos los hombres les serviría que nosotras avanzáramos en el feminismo, pero yo creo que hay que ver también quién pierde, porque cuando uno lucha, obviamente alguien está oponiendo resistencia, o si no, sería fácil para las mujeres ser iguales a los hombres, y yo creo que más que los hombres, en realidad el capitalismo es el que se beneficia de la opresión de las mujeres, como de la opresión de todas las otras minorías que hablaban antes, como la raza, o sea, las diferencias como la raza o las clases sociales. Entonces, frente a eso, hoy día nos enfrentamos a la pregunta de cómo seguimos luchando para de verdad ser más libres como mujeres, y yo siento que muchas veces eso se reduce a como la ampliación de derechos en las democracias. Hoy día luchamos por el aborto, pero también, por ejemplo, más representación dentro de los parlamentos y cuestiones así, y en realidad hay países donde esas cosas están muy resueltas, pero en verdad todavía dependen de la opresión de mujeres en el mundo, como Suecia, por ejemplo, donde las mujeres participan igual que los hombres en el trabajo y también en las cámaras de diputados y están igualmente representadas, pero dependen de otros países enteros como Bangladesh, donde explotan a mujeres, po. Entonces yo siento que aunque nosotras luchemos por todos los derechos democráticos que podamos luchar, en realidad el patriarcado va a seguir existiendo porque tiene que haber patriarcado para que siga habiendo capitalismo. Entonces, frente a eso, ¿cómo luchar para de verdad acabar con el patriarcado? Y también acabar con cualquier forma de opresión, no solamente a las mujeres, sino a todas y todos quienes hoy día sufren de opresión.
So that's a loaded question. So, you know, I think that we know that the situation for women around the world is devastating. It's devastating. And I've been in many, many countries in the world and done this work all over the world, and it's devastating. And I think your point is well taken, right? We can fight for more rights here, but look what's happening in Bangladesh, or look what's happening in Iran, or look what's happening. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. But we can still fight for our rights here, right? And we can still be hopeful that that makes a difference to women in other parts of the world. You know, I mean, there's all different ways to participate in social justice movements, right? You can participate at the individual level, going to the march, feeling like you're part of a whole. You can participate at the international level. I was telling Carla I was the United Nations delegate for the first International Day for Women in Science. So I was able to participate at the United Nations level, bringing about educational rights for women for around the world. There's all different kinds of levels we can fight at. But if we're busy infighting, we're not going to be able to fight at all those different levels. And I think that we need to understand that this is hard work. It's exhausting work. And sometimes we want to give up. And self-care is really important. Self-care is really, really important, because if we just stay angry and we just keep seeing all the oppression, we're not going to be able to move forward in the places we can, right? And to make the changes we can. You know, and if we look at the past 30 years, there's been a lot of positive change, but we have a long, long way to go for global equality for women. A long, long way to go. But if we get caught up in looking at the long, long way to go, we might be too tired to do what we need to do right now, right? And so take your anger, hold on to it, take your energy, move forward with it, and make the changes that you feel like you have the ability to make. And don't feel discouraged if you can't make all the changes and change the world, because then you're just going to stop making any change, right? Because we have a long way to go, right? And that's why we do this work, because we care and we want to make a change. I don't have all the answers. I'm never going to have all the answers. I'm just here because they invited me to come. And I wanted to offer you some hope and some inspiration, to walk with you, to be a colleague with you in this collective global struggle for women's rights. So that's my best answer.
Gracias, muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Bueno, como esto para nosotros es histórico, quería ver si se pueden tomar todos una foto para que pasemos a la historia acá en la FEN. Con nada, y bueno, agradecer y espero que les sirva de inspiración. Nosotros vamos a marchar con ustedes también, así que ahí vamos a estar. ¿Ya? Pero espero que se junten porque no sé si salen todas así, se pueden poner por los lados.
What was your question? But you managed to.
Can't save the world. And they can't get rid of their anger.
No. You how you say, you acoger, you say, to cuddle their anger.